It's funded by USAID and implemented by East West Management Institute. Through both our Civil Society program and our Masters in Public Administration, the objective of this program is really to bring practicality to policy implementation. It's a sort of a nice policy without the implementation plan. Is a lot like a nice man. There's only two things you can do with a nice man. You can either marry him up to your sister or you put him on top of your television set. Today we are honored tonight to have William Eimicke, the founder and director of the Pickett Center, the Executive Management School at Columbia University, as our guest speaker who will provide us with a practical experience in implementing policies through public-private partnerships across the globe. I want to extend my sincere appreciation to Alexi, who will moderate the discussion between our panel of experts and the general audience following Dr. Eimicke's presentation. At the same time, I want to thank the Business Association of Georgia and ICU for providing us with a distinguished panel of experts. At the same time, I want to thank the National Library for providing us this space for tonight's discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Dr. William Eimicke. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you all for coming. I know the last thing most of you need in the late afternoon is to listen to a university professor talk about some complex topic. The only good news is it's an opportunity for those of you who are good at it to get a little afternoon nap in before your dinner. I've been teaching at Columbia University for more than 20 years, and really expert graduate students have perfected the ability to sleep with their eyes wide open. So as this gentleman right here, they'll be looking right at you, they'll be smiling, they'll be looking like they're hanging on every word you have to say, and their mind is in Hawaii, on the beach, thinking about better things. So if the worst comes of today's talk, I hope at least you get a nice little rest. Let me begin by just thanking you all, USAID for providing the funds that allow us to be here, the East West Management Institute for having us as a partner, for Ilia State University for also now being our partner. We, as many of you may know, we signed an agreement this week, and we'll be working together to create a world-class Masters in Public Administration program at ISU. David's here, who's the man who's building it. And we are very excited about that work, which we'll be doing over the next 4 years. To the leaders of your business community for bringing the wisdom to today's discussion, which I cannot bring, and that is, I know probably what most of you have in the tip of your thumb about Georgia. But I am passionate about learning. We've spent the last few months learning as much as we can, and we'll be spending the next 4 years trying to learn even more. My hope today is that I can share with you what I know about what goes on in other places, and particularly what goes on in the United States. And I think particularly from New York City, you will see a lot of potential parallels and things to learn from. And then finally, thank you to the government and the people of Georgia for being so hospitable to us. Do not let me speak more than 45 minutes, so check your watches. And as I get close, start to nod or snore or make noises. I want to have as much time for a conversation as possible. Let me set my talk in a context and give you some idea of really who I am, what I believe in, and what I think actually works. The first is, if you've had a chance to look at the talk, you might think that I'm a person who is pro-private sector, thinks government really, the kind of Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher philosophy, which is what's wrong with society is government. If we can get rid of government, everything will be great. I think that proposition is idiotic, and that's a compliment. Without government, the private sector is not possible. And I run 3 businesses myself. Without government, you start Microsoft, and the next day, 50 people have stolen your ideas and are selling it. The private sector needs government as much as the poor citizen needs government. So the issue is not government or not government. The issue is what government does. And the challenge is for government to figure out what it must do and do that well, and then to work with the private sector to do all the other things that society needs. I think equally as idiotic, and I think world events have proven it, is the idea that government can do everything. We've tried that. It didn't work very well. So, unfortunately, as you learn as you get older in life, the truth in most situations is somewhat in the middle. And I think what I'll talk about today is that middle ground of public-private cooperation, of figuring out what is government only, what is private sector only. Increasingly these days, what goes in the NGO sector, and then what issues really cross over and can be addressed most effectively across sectors. The public-private partnership is the new hot approach to the public arena. If I were giving this talk 20 years ago, we'd probably be talking about reinventing government. If we were doing it 10 years ago, we'd be stressing privatization. Today it's public-private partnerships. But reinventing government didn't really go away. We still need to do that. Privatization still makes sense. Public-private partnerships, even though 10 years from now won't be the hottest idea, will still make sense as well. So the next point I want you to hear from me is, I don't see this as a magic bullet. This is not the solution to every situation, every policy, every service. It's a choice. It's a good choice, I think, and one that can be used in a lot of circumstances, but it doesn't work all the time. And sometimes, even when it should work, it doesn't. You're not going to be successful 100% of the time. So I would hope that we would have somewhat modest expectations. Not low expectations, but realistic expectations. And I guess the last thing I will say is my own life experience. I grew up very poor. I was the first person on either side of my family to graduate high school. And I was able to be successful in my life, and one of the main reasons was public-provided education. If it weren't for public schools, I'd be, not that there's anything wrong with it, I'd be pumping gas on Long Island. That's what I would do, as many of my friends are still doing as I go see them. So I'm a firm believer in what government can and does do for people. But I'm also, by profession, a manager. And my view is that government does many things well. Managing is generally not one of them. So involving the private sector, who generally does management very well, can be a benefit to both sides. So that's kind of the context. Let's kind of launch through what I hope to talk about today. First issue is partnerships are not just for government. There can be partnerships, and there are many, between two private organizations, among government agencies, among NGOs, and any combination thereof. So we'll talk about from an organization's perspective, from any of your perspectives, all of you work in organizations, what should motivate you as a manager to consider partnership as a way to do your job better? So that's the first area we'll talk about. Then I want to describe some successful partnerships. And the main point that I have there is that partnerships are working well for governments all over the world. Big countries, small countries, liberal countries, conservative countries, all different kinds of cultures, Asia, Latin America, North America, Europe. Partnerships work in any situation. They also can fail in any situation, but I don't think they're culturally or size limited. And I'll just try to illustrate that point. And then to kind of finish my remarks, I really want to focus on 3 examples from New York City. And for those of you all of you are probably younger than me, but most of you are significantly younger, and you may not remember a time where New York City was one of the most dangerous cities in the world. The highest crime rate for any large city, the highest murder rate per capita of any big city in the world. Television shows popular throughout the world in the 70s and 80s were all about how scary and dangerous it was. There were no European tourists to New York City in the late 70s and early 80s because it was such a dangerous and daunting place. In fact, if you ever get a chance through rental, Netflix or anything over the internet, you can rent a film called The Out-of-Towners. And it's about a couple from the Midwest of the United States. The husband gets a job offer in New York City, so they come to New York City for the weekend. And the 3 days are a disaster, from their plane flight in to the trains. They get robbed, they become homeless, they get beat up. And it's all about how New York City is an impossible place. Flash forward 20, 25 years later, New York City is the model, virtually, for big cities around the world. Everybody wants to come there. We have more tourists than, we have too many tourists. So we can help you with that objective. You can have some of ours. But it turned around dramatically. And one of the reasons why New York City turned around so dramatically was public-private partnerships. The view in the 70s and 80s of public officials in New York City about the private sector was the private sector was there to be taxed. That's why we had a private sector, because we could get lots of tax revenues from them. No partnerships, no cooperation, just tax them. And what happened? Businesses moved out in droves. And what happened to New York City? It went down. When New York City changed that attitude and started working with business instead of against business, New York City came back. So we'll conclude with that, and then we'll open it up to our experts, and they can give some real content. So why partner? Well, one reason why organizations, particularly in the private sector, partner with another organization is because they're going to make more money. It's a better use of resources. It can help you solve problems. Other organizations maybe have the expertise, the talent, the technology that you don't. They help you overcome obstacles that you face that you can't solve yourself. In many cases, they're more efficient, so they enable you to do more with less. Access to new markets, to new skills. Particularly, I can speak for Columbia University. We are using, as we are with ISU, we're using partnerships to globalize. We're not building Columbia universities all over the world, as some universities are. Rather, we have partnerships with existing universities all over the world, and we can globalize. We started talking 4 months ago. We're globalized now. Quick, easy, effective, probably works better as well. And thereby you can access new customers with the other universities that we're partnering with. We have joint degree programs where students go to both universities, get degrees from both universities. And then finally, you can provide new services. Some of our partners teach subjects that we couldn't begin to hire the faculty to do. So